Come on.
There is no tomorrow. There is no tomorrow. There is no tomorrow.
Turned around, guys. We are back, baby. We are fucking back. We're back. Yeah. Classic. We are back. We are back.
And we're the three best friends that anybody could have. We're the three best friends that anyone could have. We're the three best friends that anyone can have. And we'll never, ever, 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 ever leave each other. We're the best three friends that anybody could have. I mean the three best friends that anybody could have.
Welcome back into The Door Report, episode 279 on a lovely Wednesday evening, August 28th, 2024. I am Will Byrum, joined as always by my co-host, Trevor Hulan, a.k.a. Hack Squat Jim Duggan, and we have a very special guest who has blessed us with his virtual presence. Was supposed to be in person, but the busiest man on earth couldn't be bothered to stop by our TDR studio. We are joined by none other than VandySports.com's Billy Derrick. Billy, thank you for joining today.
Welcome back into the Door Report alongside. No, I'm kidding.
Oh,
There we go.
I love it, dude. How
Man.
proud of you are Will? How proud of you? How proud are you of Will and the strides he's made with the TDR intro?
Dude, he's gotten really good. Like
Just like
Will,
a chip off the
Will,
block.
yeah, Will's a smooth operator now. I
Learning from the
groomed
best.
him. Yeah,
Oh,
groomed him a little bit.
Boss.
Like,
Hot start. Flip that.
I will say Will was always ahead of that with the sly comments there, like keeping me on my toes. So I'll give him credit for that.
We are joined by Billy Derrick on episode 2. Wait, before I forget, actually, we are sponsored by 615 Collectibles. If you're into sports cards or sports memorabilia, check out 615 Collectibles on eBay for an unmatched selection of sports cards. Shipping is always fast and free. Also, before I forget, I have to give a shout out to Outlaw Beer for becoming the official beer of TDR. Dropped off some sample 12 packs today of their Mile High Light beer. It will be available for your sampling pleasure in the Lot 2 tailgate before this Virginia Tech game that we are previewing in episode 279. So stop by Lot 2, look for the TDR flag. We're going to have some Cracker Barrel biscuits, some bacon, some eggs, and some Outlaw Mile High Light beer, Trevor.
Hopefully we don't drink all before Saturday because, dude, this is a delectable, crisp, light beer. Low in calories, dude. Only 100 calories?
Trevor's fully sold out.
This is insane, dude.
I would have
this is
never
like
thought.
105. I'm sorry, but that extra 5 doesn't really count. Just a delicious beer, dude. I can't wait to absolutely slam the hell out of these with some eggs and
Dude.
biscuits, dude. I'm so ready.
Outlaw should steal, what is it, Miller's campaign, which is 96 calories, only 1 more calorie than Michelob, only 9 more calories than Miller Lite for this much more flavor. Wow.
Dude, delicious.
Wow. Incredible.
Just
See,
a full body beer.
for all those sponsors out there that have not reached out to TDR, this is the quality sponsorship representation you could be having on a day-to-day basis with TDR. So reach out to me on Twitter and our DMs. Didn't plan that at all. That
No,
was actually 100%.
That was just
off the
straight
cuff.
raw.
That's the
I'll
skill
drink a
we
whole
have.
12er right now.
We got a stack of them
I'll-
over there.
I'll drink 24 beers right now.
Time to get a little bit back on track. We have the Virginia Tech preview that we'll be getting into on episode 279. We are going to give we're going to preview Virginia Tech. We also have Billy on. So Billy is not. Why are you laughing at that? So
I don't know. That was kind of
I was
funny.
circling it back to say Billy has not joined since fall camp has started. The last time Billy joined was around Christmas. Yeah, so it's been a while. So we're going to ask Billy his general takeaways from what he's seen at fall camp and everything associated with his expectations of the football season. But before we get into all that in segment 1 and much more, don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at The Door Report. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Our podcast is available on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and Google Podcasts. And while you're at it, give our podcast 5 stars and a review on iTunes. It's now time for segment 1.
Oh, hey. Hot one today, huh?
Yeah.
Welcome back into segment 1 of episode 279 of the Door Report. We are joined by Billy Derrick of VandySports.com, headed into week 1 of the college football season. The Vanderbilt Commodores take on Virginia Tech at home at 11 a.m. on August 31st. Billy, you've been in attendance at fall camp at some practices that us common folk are not allowed at, so you've had some insider access. I know you can't share everything or a lot of what you've seen about specifics, but we'll start on the offensive side of the ball. What are some general takeaways and your general feelings about the offense?
Honestly, guys, for the most part of fall camp, I'll admit it was pretty bad. Like, just objectively watching like the product on the field, the scrimmages were like, the first scrimmage was way better than the second scrimmage. And, I remember, obviously I remember letting you guys know like how they looked, obviously, and on the board and stuff, but at times they look awful, but at times that you also see where you can see what they're trying to do. And there's a lot of players, a lot of new players that obviously, as you guys know, that are being filtered in. Like, could you imagine like how hard this is? A lot, and like the key players didn't come until, the summer, midsummer, like Pavia, Wiley, Fungi, like a lot of those guys that are going to contribute. I know Wiley is out with an injury. He probably won't be back until a couple of weeks or so. But I mean, you look at even the offensive linemen like Hubbard and Mitchell didn't come until middle of the summer either. So, and that's today's day and age of college football. You have players arriving in the middle of the summer trying to figure out, what their role is. And so I think a lot of it was that, like, it was just hard to find a rhythm and build a rhythm with those guys. But I could see what they're trying to do. And the other thing is we're going to see a lot of different formations from this offense. You're going to see some 3 running back sets, and that's not even me giving away anything. That's from the track record of Tim Beck and Jerry Kill. Like, that's what they do. And so you also look at the offensive line. Coach Klenakis is not somebody to scoff over. And I think it does get overrated a little bit. Yeah, he coached Lamar Jackson and Colin Kaepernick, but it's a totally different offensive line type scheme. And I'm sure you guys know the strong guard, quick guard, strong tackle, quick tackle. When has Vanderbilt ever utilized that? And I think that's some triple option type stuff that people have been clamoring for. They're going to be running some triple option. I will say Nate Johnson was underwhelming on the whole. And I was interested to see what he would look like. And I know a lot of Vanderbilt fans were excited about him. I do think ultimately he's a package type guy. But the other thing about the quarterback position in this offense is that you've got to be able to make plays off schedule. And Pavia is really the only guy I think that can do that in this offense. Drew Dickey looked really good in that second scrimmage. I know you guys know that. But at the end of the day, guys, this is something different than last year, right? I mean, this is like the polar opposite of what they were trying to do last year. And you go back, Will, to 2022, we had some pretty fun podcasts after those Kentucky and Florida wins. What were we talking about? We were talking about the running game, the offensive line, Mike Wright and Ray Davis. Well, I think after wins this year, that's what you're going to be talking about. You're going to be talking, man, great day from the offensive line. They ran the football. Vanderbilt, guys, in your Vanderbilt fans' tenure as Vanderbilt fans, when has Vanderbilt football ever been a product offensively that lights up the scoreboard for 40 points? I mean, I guess you could say maybe Jay Cutler, but like they weren't even.
Yeah, a couple Franklin seasons.
Those anomalies of James Franklin, but those were 8 and 4 seasons.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. But even then, they were creative. Like Curtis Samuels and Jordan Rogers, they were guys that made plays off schedule. They could run the ball. They weren't guys that just, hey, drop back and throw 40 passes a game. They had good running backs, a creative offensive line. I just think they're getting back to that, and they had to. And so I think that's a big thing I look at. Last year, they were trying to do what everybody else was doing and figured out pretty quickly that wasn't going to work. So I think, Will, that's the biggest thing. It looks different. It had to look different, but do they have the guys around Pavia? I think that's the biggest question. Are enough guys going to be able to step up? And I know you guys have talked about the weapons they have. We've talked about it ad nauseum with Vandy Sports. Like that, I think that's ultimately who it's up to. Like a lot of people say, oh, it's all on Pavia. Well, it's also on everybody else. Like everybody else has to gather around him and play well. So I think like these receivers, I think will be huge because you also have to be able to throw the ball down the field. Now, when we talk about the receivers, you also have to lump in the tight ends, Cole Spence, Stowers, Cam Johnson. Those three guys right there could lead the team in receiving. Like I'm not even kidding in that. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what weapons are targeted. But ultimately, like I said, well, it's different than last year, and they're going back to more of a 2022 style, which I think they had to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Phoebe has joined us here, and she had a question. So there were a lot of positives you kind of spun the offensive changes into, but you also started out that whole answer with it was a struggle for the most part. So this is kind of a tough question. If you could place the biggest portion of that struggle on one position group or one area of the offense, where would that be? Would that be the receivers, the O-line, the quarterback play? What would have been the main problem that you saw on the offensive side?
I would say the receivers, just the chemistry between quarterback and receiver. At times you did see Cheryl get loose down the field, and Skinner was kind of a non-factor, which was a little surprising. Fungi, not the best route run, not as good of a route runner as I might have expected him when he came in. Wiley just wasn't healthy a lot of camp, so you didn't get a great look at him. But like guys like Hoskins, and this is crazy to say this, but Landon Wells made a lot of plays. I know he's a second-team receiver there, which we have a question on our board about that, and I was confused too. But like this offense, you need a guy that is sure-handed. You don't need a guy that's necessarily a burner. You'd like to have him, but it was the receiver group. Like so many different practices, they just looked off with the quarterbacks. The offensive line, like when they tried to run the football, especially short yardage, I thought the offensive line was fine, but anytime you wanted to find a crease for 20 or 25, 30 yards, that wasn't available like at all. So I think short yardage, big boy physical football, they'll be able to play that a little bit better than what we saw last year. But receiver wise, I just think it's going to be a challenge because you need more than just two guys. Like, I don't even know if they have two guys, you could say. Skinner is still unproven to me in a weird way. Like he hasn't been able to stay healthy, and he just doesn't have enough production. And so I would say receivers. Pavia would be on target with a throw, but it'd be dropped, on a slant route the middle. It's just certain plays where, okay, that was a play to be made there by the receiver, but he didn't go up and make the play. I do think you got to credit the defense, certain situations too, but I just didn't think, there were enough plays made by receivers on good throws from quarterbacks, whether it was Pavia, Dickey, or Johnson. I don't want to lump in the tight ends with them in that regard. I think Sowers and Spence and those guys were good all fall camp, but receiver-wise, I just don't know if there's enough. I mean, you gotta have at least three guys, I think, in the SEC. It's going to be up to like guy like Fungi that didn't do a ton in fall camp to prove he's a gamer. It just plays well in games. I think you need that and Hoskins is a sleeper. Like Hoskins, I know came from Middlebury College, and he's a guy that walked on here, got some time last year. I think they like him. And he's going to be a guy, I think, that's open just mysteriously certain plays and gets you 15, 20 yards. But it's the receivers to me, Will.
And I want to let Trevor also talk. I'm not trying to take up
No, I love hearing Billy Derrick talk.
The number one player that jumps out that didn't even get a mention from you in that statement about the receivers. Haven't heard much about him in general, which was a concern for me. I put him as my number one player to watch going into fall camp because I was like, this could be the last time you ever hear about him is on this episode. He could be a key playmaker and a gadget guy used all around. Micah Bell switched over from DB, transfer from Notre Dame, switched over to wide receiver from being a defensive back. Do you expect to even see him on the field? I didn't even see him listed on the depth chart that was released.
He wasn't on the depth chart, and honestly, he didn't get a ton of reps in fall camp, and they're in the process of turning him into a receiver. He was a defensive back at Notre Dame. He was an athlete in college, played running back in college actually, but he's just so raw. Like just seeing him warm up at the beginning of fall camps, like seeing him run routes, it just didn't look crisp and it just looked like a guy that was learning how to play the position. I don't know that you'll see him this year. And if you do, it's going to be on an end around where he's on the field. Like if he's on the field, he's getting the ball. I think it's a situation like that. Like he's not even really a guy you can use as a decoy because he hasn't done really anything at receiver. So there's no tape on him. So it's like, yeah, he's got speed, but it's like in NCAA 25. If you got a DB, you want to switch to quarterback. That's still hard because like he's never played quarterback. So
yeah, just imagined a possibility of him being like a Darius Sims, like a guy that was brought in.
I think that's a good comparison. Yeah,
actual positional skill, but man, he was good on those jet sweeps, end arounds, because he was just one cut and go, and that was what I was hoping Micah Bell could possibly turn into, but just haven't heard anything about him. So that tells me a lot when you don't hear anything. Yeah, that says pretty much everything you need to know.
Yeah. And Billy, he's really athletic though. So I think you could maybe down the stretch of the season start to see him more.
Billy, I'm glad we're talking about offense. And I'm glad we'll ask the questions about offense, because I got a couple questions about my boys on the defensive side. I think as much as the offense is an unknown, and it scares a lot of Vandy fans. It scares the hell out of me. I'm not really sure what to expect. I think we feel that way about the defense, and I think Vandy fans feel that way about the defense, but certainly in a more positive way, I feel, given that Clark Lee is now the defensive coordinator and given the talent that Vanderbilt not only returned from last year's season, but also in the portal. So and I know on Vandy Sports on the board, whenever you do go to practices and scrimmages, that's sort of your side as you're watching the defense. So my first question is, and I want to ask you this, since you have been to most of the practices in both scrimmages, we know that CJ Taylor is going to be the guy. We know that the guy behind him is probably going to be Langston Patterson. Is there one guy, or if you could name one or two guys on the defense that sort of shocked you a little bit, that you didn't really have super high expectations for, maybe any expectations for at all, that you saw in fall camp and thought, wow, this guy's a player?
Randon Fontenette is a guy. Now, I had expectations for him, and he has played to those. He's everywhere. He has been everywhere, and they needed that, and he's a guy that he's still young and he's still learning a lot, but I think you're going to see a lot of plays made by Randon Fontenette this fall. And then other than that, like Colby Taylor is a guy I'm still interested to see his actual play on the field, but just mentally and like I think you'll be able to get into guys' heads. Like he talks a lot of trash. I know I texted you guys about one particular play in one of the scrimmages. Like he's full of energy. He's confident in what he can do. I think he's going to make some plays. Now, at his position, he's going to be guarding the best receiver likely on every team. So I think he'll have his fair share of breakdowns, but he's physical. I think their corners will be good in the run game, but that's a good question, Trev, because I would definitely say Brandon Fontenette. And then on the line, this is where it gets tough. Linus Zunk had a really good fall. And he was just a lot more active, and he's older now. He's a junior, and he's gotten bigger. Like he's developed, and with Steiner coming in, he's gotten even more athletic. He's a word that Coach Black and Hay have used with their line is twitchy. Guys that are athletic, they can bend and they can get across, get into the line of scrimmage. Bradley Mann was active in these scrimmages too. And so I think they've got and people might call me crazy for this, but I do think they've got better depth on the line, like legitimately. And I know I probably said that last year. I probably said that the year before, but I think if a guy were to go down like a Demarion Thomas, you got Wataha right behind him. If Sidner goes down, you like what you have in Zunk still. Same thing with Bradley Mann on the inside. So Bradley Mann and Zunk are a couple guys I didn't have a ton of expectations for, but they played well in fall camp. And then other than that, I think we knew what Brian Longwell was. He had a really good camp. And then after that, like Braille Lipford is the third stringer behind Fontenette. He had a one-handed diving interception in one of the scrimmages, which really stood out. I would bring him up. So yeah, in terms of the secondary, I still think a lot of those guys are unproven. And I didn't see Jalen Lackey. I forgot to mention him. Jalen Lackey is a guy Clark has brought up a lot. And I've heard from some people that they're expecting big things from him, maybe not necessarily all this season, but in his career at Vanderbilt. So I would honestly say Fontenette is a guy that could emerge as a leader, but Jalen Lackey, keep an eye on him. And he's listed third behind Colby Taylor, but I don't think that's an awful thing because we've seen cornerbacks go down at Vanderbilt before and have to plug guys in. Jalen Lackey, Trevor, is another guy to watch. He's physical, he's athletic, he's a freshman. So, we've seen corners have to play as freshmen like Martel Height last year. So I would say Lackey, Fontenette, and then a couple of linemen, Zunk and Bradley Mann, are some of the guys that maybe I didn't have a ton of expectations for, but really flashed in fall camp.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned the defensive line, and this will be my last question in regards to the defense. Specifically on that front four, I'm really interested about Cinder and Wood. I believe on the depth chart they have Zaylen Wood listed at the 3 tech, and Cinder listed at, I believe, edge. What have you seen out of those guys in particular? Is there anything about them that pops? And if you could talk a little bit more about, like you said, the depth that they have at defensive line, because that's something that popped up to me looking at the depth chart, specifically at edge rusher, is how much more depth they have at the edge position than they have had in previous years. Because if you look at edge, Darren Agu, I believe, is the 3rd guy at the edge. Mm-hmm. So what have you seen from Cinder and Wood, and sort of speak a little bit more to that depth that you've just seen on the front four?
Yeah, well, first off, with those two guys, I've told Joey this before on some of our podcasts, like Cinder and Wood are guys that have played a ton of football. They're both graduate players. Cinder from Purdue. I think Cinder's actually a senior, but Wood is a graduate guy coming in. They're older guys that have played a ton of football. And they've made the room more competitive. Like Agu getting pushed back. I think that's a product of guys like Cinder and Zaylen Wood. And I'm not going to sit here and say that Wood and Cinder have just been maulers and have taken over scrimmages and practices, but they've been vocal. They've been active. They've made plays. And like Zaylen Wood is starting above Devin Lee. Mm-hmm. Corday Cinder starting over DeCosmo. DeCosmo and Devin Lee were guys that I guess Lee didn't end up playing a ton last year due to injury, but DeCosmo played a ton last year. Darren Agu played a ton last year. Those guys have been dropped down because of guys like Cinder and Zaylen Wood, and then even some of the younger guys like Bradley Mann and Linus Zunk. But I think Wood, if you go back and watch some of his tape at MTSU, he made a really good play on a tip interception. He tipped the ball from the quarterback and returned it to the house for a touchdown. They're active, and these defensive linemen, as much as we talk about the secondary and the linebackers needing to force turnovers and takeaways, the defensive line has to as well. So instead of their focus being, hey, let's get to the backfield in a second or two, let's be a little bit more creative. Let's get our hands up. Let's try to tip the ball up, and let's try to give the ball to our offense in good field position. I think that's what Cinder can do. He's long. I think that Zaylen Wood he's not the biggest guy. I mean, we know he's about 6 foot 280, but he's smart. He's a good motor type of guy that we've heard from other Vanderbilt coaches. So you're right about the depth, Trev, but those top line guys have to perform. Like if Cinder and Wood are disappointments, that's bad news, right? Mm-hmm. Because the guys behind, those are guys that have been beaten out and aren't guys that you want to have to play a ton. You'd like to be able to have Agu in there for a snap or two, which is crazy to say, but he's gotten beat out and he's actually moved positions. He's playing the Razor now with Capers and Diakite.
I was gonna ask that. I forgot. Whenever I said that, I thought, I'm like, is he still edge or did he get moved to Razor? So thank you for correcting me because I totally forgot.
Yeah, and we didn't even know. Joey sent me a text joking about it. He was like, man, we didn't see a ton from him at fall camp, but it's actually turned out he's moved positions. So, and he was banged up last year. That's a disappointment. But at the end of the day, guys, the line of scrimmage matters in the SEC. I mean, if Vanderbilt's going to pick off a couple of SEC wins, like some people hope they can, these guys have to. I mean, last year just getting gashed. I mean, consistently couldn't stop the run, and quarterbacks had it all day. So you got to get pressure. I think Cinder and Wood are guys that can do that. I still think it's a big year for Issa Wataha. I was a little surprised to see him behind Demarion Thomas. I'm not saying no knock against Demarion Thomas, but I felt like Wataha needed to be that guy, that starter. Maybe it's a creative move, motivate him. I don't know what, but I still think Wataha is going to play. But to have Wataha right there behind Thomas and then Bradley Mann up there as well, I think there's more guys. You're almost 2-3 deep at all four of those spots, which I think is good. So they've got to be active. They got to force some turnovers because they're not going to get to the quarterback like a lot of SEC teams consistently do.
Mm-hmm.
I think we berated Billy with enough general Vanderbilt football questions for this episode because it is supposed to be a Virginia Tech preview, not just a Vanderbilt football season preview. So we are going to take a quick TDR cocktail break. So grab yourself a cold one, get it beside you, and get ready because me, Billy, and Hack Squad are all going to give our 3 keys to victory for the Vanderbilt Commodores and give our predictions for Game 1, Week 1. So get that cold one ready, and we will be right back after the TDR cocktail break. Welcome back from the TDR cocktail break. It is officially time to preview Virginia Tech. Kickoff, like I've said, I think like 10 times so far on this episode, at 11 a.m., August 31st. The Virginia Tech Hokies out of the ACC come into town, coming off, what, a 7-6 season last year after their bowl game victory?
And a fraud ACC, dude. Fraud.
A bit of a fraud ACC. I will give into that, Trevor. Currently, Virginia Tech's over-under on wins on the season is set at 8.5, with the over sitting at the odds of -128. So Vegas kind of expecting 9 wins out of this Virginia Tech team. Granted, they have a pretty cupcake schedule.
Mickey Mouse schedule.
As far as Power 5 programs go. Beat Tulane handily in their bowl game last season. They started out 2-4 on the year and then went on a very good stretch to close out the year. How much of that was due to the competition they were playing in the second half of the season? That's some stuff we might get into on this episode. Virginia Tech, a ton of roster continuity. That is the main storyline heading into this season for Virginia Tech. They were pretty decent last year, a mediocre ACC team, but the expectation is that with all of the returning talent, that they will take that step forward. I believe 25 of their 29 most utilized, or 25 of the 29 players that played a minimum of 300 snaps last year for Virginia Tech are back. They also returned their starting kicker and punter. So this is a Virginia Tech team with basically the opposite roster makeup of Vanderbilt, not necessarily with personnel, but with continuity, coaching staff continuity, player continuity. Virginia Tech could not be more on the opposite end of the spectrum than Vanderbilt. Headed into the 3rd season for head coach Brent Pry. Billy, we've kind of heard what Trevor thought about Virginia Tech during the schedule preview last week with Blake Fromang. What are your initial thoughts? How much research have you done into Virginia Tech? How are you viewing them as a team overall?
Yeah, I mean, they've got a ton of guys back, like you said, Will, and it's in Pry's 3rd year. It's the year where you should break through as a program. I look at Kyron Drones, and he looks good, right? You look at him physically, you look at some of the tape, and it stands out. He can really run the football, but through the air, like they only averaged 202 passing yards per game last year, which I think was like 97th in the country. So like they weren't a feared passing attack last year, but rushing the ball, like they really ran the football. That's what their offense is with Bashal Tootin, I think is his name, the running back. He had 863 yards in the ground. Like they ran the football. That's what they did. And so I heard a comparison earlier today, and it was kind of funny. Kyron Drones is a JV Anthony Richardson, which wasn't.
I don't know
if it was spicy.
Talking way necessarily.
It was. I mean, it was spicy, but I thought about it and I was like, you know what? You're not totally wrong in that, because like, what has he done through the air to prove that he should be feared by defenses and they should respect that? Like, I think most defenses right now, if you're going up against Virginia Tech, you load the box, you should be fine. Now, again, their play action was where they made their bread, right? Their receivers aren't elite by any stretch. They're kind of smaller guys. They've got some decent receivers, but they don't have a guy that's going to beat you down the field on a go route, like if Drones drops back, say, hey, we've got this dude we can throw it up to. I could be totally wrong in that, but I just don't. I don't think they should be feared due to what they did last year through the air with Drones passing the football. Now, running the ball, that's what he does, right? And college offense is still based. Certain offenses still base their offense around running quarterbacks like that, but I look at their schedule, guys. Last year, their wins. You beat Tulane in the bowl game. Okay, that's a bowl game, though. You never know who's playing. Virginia was historically bad last year.
Mm-hmm.
Boston College, mid. I don't even know how. They were bad. Syracuse was not good. Wake Forest. I know they beat Vanderbilt, but they were not a good. They were not a very good team last year. Pittsburgh, I think, was mediocre at best, and Old Dominion. You look at their schedule last year. Where is the win where you go, man, they beat a really good team? The really good teams they played, they lost. They lost to. Now they're playing Vanderbilt, and so obviously, I think player-wise, personnel-wise, they're better than Vanderbilt. But I think they're a little overhyped. Like some people talk about them as a playoff contender. And I'm like, I don't know. I know they have a lot of guys back, but these guys aren't. I don't see an NFL player on their offense. Maybe Kyron Drones if he develops into that, but I don't know. But defensively, they're good. I think defensively, Chris Marv, obviously, he should be at Vanderbilt. By the way, I got a tweet today. Another guy that Vanderbilt alum that's not at Vanderbilt. He's had such a good coaching career though, and I think we're surprised by where he's at. They do have a good defense. The Bud Foster lunch pail defense. They'll be good defensively. But I think offensively, and I know we'll get into the keys, but I just think through the air, they don't scare you. Now, maybe you look game one, they all of a sudden they found a passing attack, but I think they're good. I don't think they're really good or elite though. I still think they're a rung behind the top tier in the ACC.
Yeah, I think the biggest part of Virginia Tech is the returning continuity of talent, and the ACC being by far the worst conference in Power 4 football, especially after Florida State loses to Georgia Tech. That the ACC is truly terrible.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't, and I'm going to be that guy. I'm going to be that biased Vandy fan. I've been saying this for a while, and people keep calling me an idiot. I don't get the juice. I don't get it. They were voted in the ACC preseason poll. Now, granted, take preseason polls as you may. They were voted by their peers as the 6th best team in a very, very mediocre to below average conference. Their own peers do not think highly about them.
The balance I have to strike is there's a difference between saying they're overrated to me and saying they're overhyped. And that equating to they're still in my mind better than Vanderbilt. There's a difference in my mind.
Like take Vanderbilt out of this.
Yeah, they can be overrated, overhyped, and still come out and beat Vanderbilt handily. I can see that scenario, and they still come out and have a very mediocre season. I can see. But
I don't think Vanderbilt fans should be sitting here treating this like, like you're going on the road to LSU, or your Texas is coming in.
I put it in the category of those SEC games like South Carolina, Kentucky, Auburn this year, where they're not coin flips. Vanderbilt's definitely going to be the underdog as far as odds go, but they're winnable. The talent gap isn't so massive. But you talked about Kyron Drones. He didn't throw the ball a ton of gaudy yardage, but the one thing he didn't do was turn the ball over. 17 touchdowns, 3 interceptions last season. I believe he started 10 games or played the majority of 10 games. I know he started a minimum of 9. Ran for 818 yards. So the biggest thing a quarterback has to do, number one, is take care of the football. And Kyron Drones did that, pairing it with some pretty explosive running on the ground. So, and as we know, Vanderbilt historically, no matter who the coach is, cannot contain a running quarterback to save their life, no matter who is the head coach of the program.
Yeah, and that's fair. And you're absolutely right. Historically, every time Vanderbilt has gone against a mobile quarterback, we've gone into that week knowing, okay, this is going to be an absolute nightmare. I'm not saying it's going to be any different. I'm really not. But I think a 4-2-5 scheme and the base defense that Clark Lee runs, just in terms of an X's and O's standpoint, bodes well to stopping that running quarterback. Now, I also think that the athleticism that you potentially have at that razor position and at the safety position also bodes well. Does that mean Vanderbilt's going to stop him? Absolutely not. We have no idea. I think, once again, the third and final factor that we have to account for is Clark Lee as defensive coordinator. I get it. Typically, you don't want your head coach to be your defensive coordinator. I don't think that's crazy to say, but we cannot forget that Clark Lee was an elite. Probably you could make the argument, and by many people, they did make the argument, he was the best defensive coordinator in the nation for a period of time. Like, this is what he does. Like, he was regarded as an elite defensive mind. Do you trust Clark Lee to come up with a game plan to stop this guy on the ground?
Yeah. I mean, I'm always and will always be, to an extent, a Jimmy's and Joe's over an X's and O's guy. Pretty much eternally, I will be that. That scheming and game planning can only do so much once toe hits leather. Kyron Drones is a better athlete than Vanderbilt has on their entire offense. So that's where I'm not saying he's some second coming of Cam Newton. That's not what I'm trying to sound like, but he's a good player. What you saw from him last season, he's the reason Virginia Tech kind of turned things around. He's going to be a problem. And I don't know, it's going to be a great challenge. That's why this whole Virginia Tech game is a great barometer of the season. Is it's going to be a challenge. It's going to see where Vanderbilt sits early. Because then you go to Alcorn State and have Georgia State, but you're going to have this Virginia Tech game in your mind if you saw how Vanderbilt's athletes were able to contain a mobile quarterback. And that's going to be a problem they face the entire season in the SEC.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm quite as – you sound a little positive compared to how you were sounding earlier. There seems to be a trend.
Well, here's the thing, and I want to ask this to Billy. Based on what you've seen at practice, do you trust a loaded Vanderbilt box with that front four plus somebody probably like Randon Fontenette or Miles Capers at that line of scrimmage?
I'll say that I don't necessarily trust the front four, but the linebackers, Patterson, Longwell, and Fontenette, there's a lot of pressure on them. And you don't want to be in that spot as a defense, but I think Clark knows that's where they're at, and include the safeties, whether it's Taylor and Derrick Wright. Like, that's what this game is going to be. It's going to be up to those guys because the front four is what the front four is. I think we know that. And the corners kind of still are what they are. To an extent, like it's the same guys that were playing last year. And, I think they could be improved, but the middle of that defense with the linebackers and the safeties, it's up to them. I mean, they have to be in the right spot consistently. They have to make every single tackle that's available to them. And I think you made a good point there, Trev, that Vanderbilt's defense under Clark Lee, I think, is built to defend an offense like this. They're more equipped to defend an offense like this, as opposed to like Texas with Ewers and Tennessee with Nico. They're just going to sit back and, just throw the ball all over the field, I think, if they wanted to. Now, Tennessee, I know a couple of years ago ran the ball over Vanderbilt, but I just think an offense like this, like Virginia Tech wants to run the football. Vanderbilt knows that, and they got to be aware of the play action, of course. But Clark knows what he's doing with this. I still think the front four, I don't have a ton of confidence in, but the linebackers I do. But you never want all that pressure on the linebackers. That's why every play is so important. And we saw that too much last year, whether it was Ethan Barr or even Derrick Wright. Like Derrick Wright struggled at his position last year. You've got CJ Taylor playing a totally different position and Derrick Wright playing a different one as well. So that's big. I think that, does Taylor playing a different position help a lot? We'll see. But I think there's a ton of pressure on that middle of the defense and the guys, the back three, as opposed to the front four, if you know what I mean, because I'm not ready to say the front four is that improved. I know, Trevor, you want to say that so bad. I think
I'm shaking. I'm literally shaking at the thought of Vanderbilt finally having a good guy coming off the edge.
Keep on drinking.
Because think all you need is one. Like think about Dio Dengbo, a guy like that, and who are some other Vandy's had some decent edge rushers,
dude. I mean, back in the early
2010s,
back in the early 2010s, you had Walker May. Then before Derek Mason came, you had Caleb Azubike. Caleb Azubike only fell off because Derek Mason changed him to a totally different position. Kyle Westman during those Franklin teams was a really good edge rusher. Like you've had some guys just I mean,
I would say overall, that's probably the number one thing Vanderbilt has lacked over the years. That's the
in
one,
our lifetime,
that's
I totally
the
agree.
one, because Dio was still more an interior lineman. So Vanderbilt has always lacked that elite edge rusher, and that seems to be something that every freaking SEC team has. An elite level edge rusher. Vanderbilt has basically had an elite level player at every single position outside of edge rusher come through the program. They've had linebackers drafted early, safeties, corners, wide receivers,
interior guys with Dio.
They've had linemen. It's just been edge rushers. So that seems to be a generational curse. But let's get into the 3 keys to the game.
Oh, Tim Fugger. Before we go, Tim Fugger. That was another very underrated.
Solid player. Would not call him an elite.
No, he's not elite, but he was fun to watch. Number 42. That guy ruled.
Let's get to the 3 keys of the game. So what order do you guys want to go in?
You want to go Billy, me, you?
Sure. All right,
Let's
Billy. 3 keys to the game. What's your key number 1?
All right, this is very basic, guys, but if Vanderbilt turns the ball over, they have no shot. No shot. I remember we'd always joke about this, Will, but I just think it's so important this year because you would have an early turnover last year and you already lost. You felt like you already lost the game. Like at Wake Forest last year, that interception from Swan, that was a downer. And then you have that lightning delay, of course, but there were too many early mistakes, early turnovers last year that you just had the feeling took them out of games. You cannot do that. Offensively, you have to take care of the football. And even if you don't, like Tim Beck said this to us in one of the pressers, he was like, it's not a crime to punt the football. It's a lot better to punt the ball down the field 50, 60 yards as opposed to making a turnover and giving the ball to the offense in the red zone and have them ready to score. So that's the most cliche, basic key, but it's such a big key for Vanderbilt these last 3 or 4 years because the margin, there's no room for error. And there's, again, this is another year, there's no room for error. You have to take care of the football because if you don't, like certain teams, like if we were Virginia Tech fans going into this game, you could probably afford a turnover or 2 in this game because you're better, you're more skilled than Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt is only more skilled than I'd say 3 teams on their schedule. The other teams, you cannot afford to make mistakes and turn over the football. So, Trev, I'll say, or are we going to Will here?
It's Trevor next.
Okay, Trevor, I'll say take care of the ball is my first key, as basic as that is.
I mean, turnover differential wins and loses ball games. So they're cliche.
And it was awful last year. Their turnover differential was awful.
Historically.
90th in the country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Swan and just the offense in general. Shep, too, man. Shep had freaking butter, margarine on his gloves every time he went out to play football. Mine's going to be, I'm going to switch to the defensive side. I'm going to focus on, once again, my big uglies, my big hogs, my dogs. On the front, specifically, I'm going to go the interior line. I'm going to go nose tackle and 3 tech. I think you're going to need to bring pressure specifically from the interior of this defensive line. Virginia Tech loves to run the ball. Last year, ran a lot of really dangerous RPOs with Tutton or Tootin. I forget how
Tootin, yeah.
Tootin, Tutton, it's all the same. We're going to box that guy up. I'm just kidding. Maybe I might have us lose this game. Who knows? But they're gonna have some holes, and they're gonna have some opportunities to run the ball up the middle. You're going to need your 2 guys in the middle, your 3 tech and your nose tackle, to put pressure on that interior line to make them confused, make them hurry those handoffs, cause pressure, make them a little bit nervous whenever they're trying to run the ball up the middle or even any sort of sweep or zone. So I'm really looking on the interior of the defensive line to make a lot of noise this game. I would love for a lot of pressure to come from the interior defensive line.
So I'm going back to offense on mine. So you had offense. I guess Billy's was general.
Yeah.
Yours was defense. I'm going to offense for my key number 1. This might be 2 keys, but they're so hand in hand that I'm going to have them as 1 key. Number 1 is going to be win time of possession, but the real number 1 key to the game is going to be rush for 140 plus yards. Last season, Virginia Tech, when allowing less than 140 yards rushing, was 6-0. Last year, when they allowed more than 140 yards rushing in a game. They were 1-6. Vanderbilt needs to dominate on the ground and control the pace of play in this game. Like Billy said when he was kind of previewing Virginia Tech, they're not an explosive big play team with a bunch of deep threats on the outside. They have an athletic quarterback. They want to move the ball utilizing his legs and athleticism. Vanderbilt needs to run the football and control time of possession. So that's my key number one. 140 plus rushing yards, key number one.
Dude, can we just talk about that stat pull from Will right there? Hell of a stat pull.
You like that?
Oh,
That's what separates Will. Okay. Number
get
2
this man
for
in
me.
the press box. Billy, get this man in the press box. Can he cheer
I'll
from
see if
up
I-
there, or is that still frowned
if I
upon?
It's frowned upon.
I'm not giving
No.
up drinking on Saturdays to be in a press box.
Dude, you can hang out with our girl Aria Gerson, dude.
The love of my life.
All right, number 2 for me. Kyron Drones is a legit runner. We've talked about it. 881 yards last year. That was third most of any Power 5 quarterback. He had 176 yards in the bowl game against Tulane. So when he is running the ball at will, Tech is winning, right? And I'm not saying you have to hold this guy to 40 rushing yards. He just can't have an outburst of 150 rushing yards, have another career day, and just light your defense up. Because if that shouldn't happen, that's what Vanderbilt should, like you said, Trev, have him boxed out. You should be able to contain Drones to the level that he's not just every third, fourth play, he's gashing your defense for 15, 20 yards, And I'm not even talking about play action. I think they'll hit some play action plays here or there. But I just think running the football, he cannot have a career day like he did in that bowl game. And there were other games where he just, 95, 100 yards, 120 yards. I think you need to hold him to under 100 yards. And that's still a good amount for a quarterback. But he's a guy that can let loose for 150. And I think if he gets one of those career type days, that's bad news for Vanderbilt. So, and if you force turnovers on him too, make him uncomfortable. Like you have to be able to, like if he's first couple possessions, he's like, man, this defense is active. They're doing a lot of pre-snap stuff. Make him uncomfortable. Make him hesitate on his throws and make him not want to run. Make him not want to catch the snap and tuck it and run, to where he gets confused and sits back there and has to make hurried decisions. You should have quarterback hurries needs to be high here. I don't know what a good quarterback hurry number is. Trev, that's one of your D-line stats, but I think you need to hurry Drones. And because if he has all day, he will tuck it and run at that point. That's when lanes open where you have your DBs 30, 40, 45 yards down the field. So contain Kyron Drones to the extent that he doesn't have one of his career days, 140, 150 yards on the ground. So I think that's my second key, because if he does, that's tough look for Vanderbilt.
Billy, I'm glad you mentioned quarterback hurries, because before we turned on this pod, me and Will were talking just as we were getting everything set up. And I said, this defense needs to hurry him, in my opinion, at least 5 times. How many sacks is that? I don't know. I think you'd like at least 2, hopefully 3 sacks on the guy. But if you can hurry him ballpark of 5 times, I really like that for Vanderbilt. That's something that I think is a win for the Vanderbilt defense. My key number 2, started on defense. I'm going to switch to offense. In terms of game plan, I think, Billy, you've mentioned it on the pod tonight. You've mentioned it on the board. Joey's mentioned it on the board. Chris, Robbie at 24/7. Everybody's mentioned it on every freaking board in the world. The pass offense hasn't looked great. Vanderbilt, they're going to be run heavy. We know it. They're going to be a totally different offense than what they were last year. They're going to try and run the ball as much as they can. You still need to pass it, like you and Will have both said. In terms of the passing game, my second key to the game is you got to set Diego Pavia up with easy throws early on to build his confidence. I think if Vanderbilt went out there and just asked Diego Pavia to start throwing bombs, I think that's a huge mistake. But I don't think that's Tim Beck and Jerry Kill's philosophy. I think you need to set him up with easy throws, short yardage passes, and let the wide receivers hopefully work in space and make some plays for the offense to build his confidence in game. And as the game progresses, as he hopefully builds more confidence, let him improvise, let him do what Diego Pavia is known to do, and that's just get zany with the ball.
Well, my key number 2, basically exactly Billy's key number 2. So I have it written down, also kind of two keys combined into one: contain Kyron Drones, but more specifically, once you contain him, because that's step number one, force him to throw an interception. I mentioned when we were talking about Virginia Tech and talking about Kyron Drones that last year he threw 17 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Those 3 interceptions were all in 3 separate games. Let me pull that up really quick. Last season, he threw those 3 interceptions. One was in a loss to North Carolina State, the other one in a loss to Louisville, and the other interception was in a loss to Rutgers. So he did an incredible job hanging onto the football, not turning it over. When Kyron Drones turns the football over, Virginia Tech loses. So that's my key number 2. But number 1, to force him to turn the ball over, you have to take away his ability to run, because that's going to force him to throw the ball down the field versus just picking up those 5, 10, 15, 20-yard gains throughout the game. So you have to contain him, keep him in the pocket, force him to throw the ball down the field, and you have to force at least 1 interception for Vanderbilt to win this game. Billy, what do you got for number 3?
All right, I figured one of y'all would have Pavia in one of your keys. So I was like, okay, Pavia, yeah, Trevor. So I'm going to get creative here. My third key, Vanderbilt needs a big special teams play. They need a 50-yard field goal from Brock Taylor that swings the momentum. They need a big, a huge monster punt down inside the 5 from Jesse Mirko, or they need a kickoff or punt return or a block. Like any huge special teams momentum play that shifts the momentum to Vandy's side. I don't think they had that enough last year. And I think this is a game that you have to have one of those plays that totally shifts the momentum on your sideline. You remember the Wake game a couple years ago at home? Guys, I think we were all there. Vanderbilt had a
2022?
Yeah, 22. I know they lost the game, but early Vanderbilt was in that game in the first half. And of course, Wake got loose. Vanderbilt, Mike Wright threw an interception. And this wasn't necessarily special teams, but you felt the momentum shift to your side on that 4th down stop. And Vanderbilt had basically a stonewall stop there. And again, that wasn't special teams, but that was a type of play that in the grand scheme of things, you don't necessarily remember after the game, number one, because it was a loss, but you have to have plays like that shift momentum. It doesn't necessarily have to be early in the game, but say Vanderbilt's down a couple of touchdowns, and to get back in the game, there's a big special teams play made by whoever. Again, it could be a punt return touchdown, kick return touchdown, block punt, whatever, right? And it could even be a huge field goal from Brock Taylor, which, by the way, guys, I know y'all have been seeing on the boards. He's got an absolute leg, and I think y'all should be excited to see Brock Taylor. But big special teams play, something that totally shifts the momentum. And maybe it's a touchdown. Maybe it's a block punt for a touchdown. But something like that shifts it to where you feel in the stadium as a fan, okay, we're back in it, right? You start to feel that. So I think they need that, especially in a game like this where you might find yourself down 3 scores and you need something to ignite the crowd.
Mm-hmm. Billy speaking to my heart, dude. As Billy knows, we are a special teams pod here. I'm a big Brock Taylor truther. Will is sort of he's very much I'll believe it when I see it type guy, which I respect. I respect. This is the dichotomy of TDR here. Is I'm already a Brock Taylor truther. Shout out to Will Ferris. That's my guy. Shout out to Julian Ashby, Daniel Gaw. We love those guys here at TDR. And most importantly, shout out to our beautiful Australian boy, Jesse Mirko. But also, before I go to my key 3, shout out to our other beautiful Australian boy, Matt Hayball. Congratulations on winning the starting job with the Carolina Panthers. The Saints. Oh, we got two Saints. Two Saints, yep. Dude. Anthony and Matt Hayball. So congrats to those guys. I'm going to stay on offense. And this isn't going to be one particular player, but this is going to be as the offense as a whole. Really, this third key is about Tim Beck. Tim, you got to let your balls hang this game. Vanderbilt has got to adopt this mentality. And I know that every game is not a must win for Vanderbilt because Vanderbilt's expectations are not to make the college football playoff, but they need to adopt the mentality that every single game is do or die. One of my favorite memories of all time is that 2011 Vanderbilt versus Ole Miss game, to where James Franklin called against a bad Ole Miss team. Vanderbilt already had the lead. James Franklin calls a Statue of Liberty play with Larry Smith. Vanderbilt takes it in for a huge gain. Wasn't a touchdown. We need that type of swagger.
Fake
We need
field
that
goal
type
with Kerry Spear.
Yes, exactly. We need that type of real do or die mentality in every game, specifically and especially this Virginia Tech game, because as Will and I have both talked about, I'm right on the same page with Will. I've even said this. I've even gone a step further. I think this Virginia Tech game is the most important game on the schedule because I think this legitimately, if you win this game, could change the trajectory of the entire season. I know a lot of people aren't saying Vanderbilt's a bowl team. I firmly believe, and I will repeat it, if Vandy wins, the expectation is to go 6-6. It immediately changes from going 4-8, picking up an SEC win, to if you beat Va Tech, you change that mentality. So we need to go bowling this year. So this is a huge game. This is legitimately a do or die. Tim Beck needs to let his nuts hang and call plays like it is a do or die game for Vanderbilt. Don't be soft. Don't be conservative. Be aggressive. I guess the first game of the season, you have nothing to lose. Throw all your chips on the table. I know it's weird to say that about the first game of the season, but you got to do it.
In this Virginia Tech game, if they get blown out, you lose something. They have very little to lose in this Virginia Tech game and a whole lot to gain.
Yep, absolutely.
We've tried to hit on that but like if Vanderbilt comes out and loses this game by 20 points, nobody's ready to say this is a disaster. Fire Clarkley. This is it's time to end this experiment. Nobody's saying that. It's just like, okay, they lost to Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech was more talented. Was it ideal? Obviously not. But you have a lot more games on the schedule. If they win, like you said, everything changes. You go from like, okay, the changes this offseason have worked. It was a coordinator problem. Clarkley at DC is probably going to work. This new Tim Beck scheme is going to work, attacking how they did in the transfer portal. They were able to identify talent. You could gain all of that from one game. So that's what's on the table in this. I wish I had something more creative for my key number 3 here. You guys got a little more creative there. Let your nuts hang from Tim Beck, from Trevor. And then special teams turnover. My number 3 is pretty much what you could say about every single game, but I'm going to specifically say handle Virginia Tech's pressure. That was the good part of Virginia Tech's defense last year, was their defensive line and linebackers.
Sacks.
I think they were number 2. I don't have the stats in front of me. Number 2 in the ACC at getting into the backfield. They returned their best, I think it's their best defensive player, Antoine Powell-Ryland, on one end of that defensive line, 9.5 sacks last season, 14.5 tackles for loss. They also have the other side of their defensive line returning in Cole Nelson. They have a couple transfers in from Duke and Oklahoma on the interior of that defensive line. So this offensive line has a challenge starting from week 1, a couple linebackers returning from Virginia Tech as well. It all starts with the offensive line. All this stuff from Tim Beck, all the stuff they've implemented in the offseason, all of it can look fantastic or look terrible through fall camp, but it all relies on, can the offensive line execute their assignments? Can they beat the man across from them? It's another Jimmy's and Joe's thing. You can scheme as much as you want. Klinakis can try to work as much magic as he wants, but at the end of the day, can this offensive line and keep guys like Kevo Wesley and Castillo, can they take a step forward and be better? And can these transfers in, like Chase Mitchell from Liberty, can he be a stopgap? Can Steven Lasoya transfer what he did at Mississippi State over to that center position and be a true SEC center? So handling Virginia Tech's pressure and allowing Pavia to operate in the offense. I would say last year, allowing A.J. Swan to throw the ball downfield, I don't think it's throwing the ball downfield. I just think it's allowing him to go through his reads, go 1, 2, 3. It's allowing those counters time to set up, allowing screens, allowing those weird formations to actually work so you can utilize a lot more plays in your playbook. So that's my key number 3. Handle Virginia Tech's defensive pressure, and the offensive line has to step up. So that's all 3 keys from all 3 of us. I think it's time to get into the prediction portion of episode 279 here. So same order that we did the 3 keys to the game. Billy, how do you see this game playing out, and what's your final prediction?
Guys, I've kind of gone back and forth. Like, I remember maybe not right when the schedule came out, but pretty early in the offseason, like in the spring, looking at the Virginia Tech game and going, Vanderbilt's got a shot. Like, Vanderbilt should hang in there. That should be a 4-quarter game. And, we should be looking up late in the game. Vanderbilt's in it. And will have a shot to win. as you got through this, through the summer or not summer, as you got through the spring and then into the fall, I slowly got a little bit more pessimistic in that. I'm kind of back up closer to where I was before the spring now. I've kind of leveled up a little bit. I still think Vanderbilt will compete. I don't think they'll get embarrassed. I think the product on the field will be easier on the eyes. I think it'll be better. Everything operationally, I don't think there'll be as many mistakes, but it's still, it's like you started over, especially on offense, right? And there's so many new coaches, there's so many new players. I think this is a team, and I'm getting ahead of myself here, but late in the season, similar to 22, that they might fit better, obviously start to fit better. There's a lot of teams. Look at Florida State. I have all of those transfers, and DJU struggled in game one. Georgia Tech was a team that brought back a little bit more guys. They had more continuity, and they were more settled. Is Vanderbilt settled right now? Do they know where they're at? Do they like where they're at? Who knows? I still think Virginia Tech, obviously we know they're a better football team. I think Vanderbilt will be in it, but I don't think they'll be able to do enough against Virginia Tech's talent. Like, Will, you talk about Jimmy's and Joe's is what ultimately matters. Virginia Tech is a better football team, and more times than not, the better football team wins. The more talented football team wins. Quarterback-wise, you hear this. I think I remember telling you this, Will, in some of the other podcasts we would do. Most games, the better quarterback wins, right? I think it's closer than we think. Like, Kyron Drones is good. I think he's better than Pavia, but I think it's close because Vanderbilt has Pavia. I think Pavia will be able to do enough to make it respectable, but I think it's a game where Vandy hangs around, Virginia Tech pulls away late, and wins something like 31-17, maybe 31-20. But I'll go official score, lock it in. Virginia Tech wins 31-17. But I think it's a situation where it's 24-17 late. Vanderbilt maybe makes a turnover late or gets a stop on a fourth down, gets stopped on fourth down, and Virginia Tech takes over. They go pull away. I think it could be something like that. But also it's week one. I mean, Vanderbilt could come out and look really good and get ahead and who knows? You get into the fourth quarter, you never know. I could also see Virginia Tech pummeling Vanderbilt. Like I could all. It just, you don't know. There's not a lot of times, Will, in these games you can look at it and say, okay, either this or that's happening. I think the variation is wider here, but I still think I'm going to go kind of average here. I think Virginia Tech wins 31-17. I think Vanderbilt looks better. I think they compete, and I think they prove their worth. And I think you're proud of the effort. But I don't think they win. I don't think they're quite ready to beat a team like Virginia Tech yet. But a team like an Auburn down the stretch later in the season would be a game that I would predict. So yeah.
It's tough as a Vandy fan. Every off season, even when the facts in your face tell you they're not gonna do it, you still, because you're so sick and twisted from watching football, watching basketball, watching baseball all your life with your dad, and just to even muster up the courage and the will to watch Vanderbilt athletics, you have to have something sick in your brain tell you they might do it just so you can get up and set yourself in front of the TV or go to the bank or go to Memorial or go to the Hawk. Can I read you guys a poem?
Let's hear it.
Please.
Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard. A sore must be the storm that could have bashed the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest seas, and yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. Hope makes you sick, Will. I'm sick in the head. I'm going to be at Lot 2. I'm going to be at the bank. Von Tech fans are coming for Broadway. I'm coming for a fist fight. Give me the Doors, 21-17. It was always the underdogs. It was always Clark Lee. It was always Vanderbilt. Hoo, hoo, hoo. Doors on top till I die.
Will?
Good luck following that up. That was beautiful. I
Check
might
Trevor's
change my whole
pulse.
prediction now. You've almost got me changing up what I was going to say. Trevor, I want to predict that so badly. Everything you just said, I feel that in my heart, in my soul. I said it during our schedule preview. I bought into the hype train so hard last year. I bought into everything coming out, all the reports, this offense was clicking, everything associated with that, all the returning talent. This year, the reports have not been good out of camp overall, I would say. Not a lot of returning talent. A new regime of Vanderbilt football, a new era, even though it's the same head coach. God, I wish this wasn't my prediction. I think Virginia Tech is going to beat Vanderbilt. I think it is going to be, I don't want to say close. I don't think it's going to be a blowout. I think Virginia Tech, however, is going to have control of the game throughout most of the second half. I'm predicting a very similar score to you, Billy, but I think it's going to play out in a little bit different fashion. So I think it's going to be 31-17, the exact same score you predicted. I just think it's not going to feel as close as the 31-17 game. I don't think it's going to be embarrassing. I don't think Vanderbilt's going to get blown out. I just think overall Virginia Tech's talent is just better. And like you said, 9 times out of 10 or whatever the actual number is, the better football team just wins with the more talented players. So Trevor's looking at me with disgust, lust. I'm not sure which
9 out of
those.
10. It only takes the one.
But there's a reason they play the game. I can see a scenario that Vanderbilt comes out and wins this game. I'm not sitting here like I was probably 3 months ago on the boat of there's no way. I can see a path to Vanderbilt winning. Do I think that's a path that's likely? No. I think a lot of Vanderbilt fans are sipping the hope Kool-Aid. And I think Vanderbilt's offense is going to look clunky. I think there's no dynamic playmakers. And I think when you have an offense that has to run between 10 and 15 plays to score the football and move it 75 yards, you're going to have turnovers and you're going to have mistakes. Vanderbilt can't afford turnovers against a Virginia Tech team that simply doesn't turn the football over. I think the defense will be improved, but the defense doesn't score points. So that's my number one problem. I think 17 points might even be too high for this offense. They have, and I mean this when I say this, Vanderbilt has 0 SEC caliber playmakers on offense. 0. And I say that with 100,000% confidence. Trevor might disagree. Not a single player on Vanderbilt's offense would be viewed as a dynamic playmaker on any other SEC roster. So that's a big problem that they simply did not address during the offseason. And that's a big, dark stain on Barton Simmons. And we love Barton on this podcast, but they did not address playmakers in the portal. And that's going to be their downfall this season. So Billy's got a 31-17 loss. Trevor has a what? What was your final score prediction?
21-17 Doors on top.
21-17 Doors on top. Trevor might be lying to all of your faces because before the podcast, Trevor said he was going to predict a loss. So don't trust a word that Hack Squat says. I don't know if he's a true believer or not.
The people know me.
The people know you.
The
but
people
also,
know me.
You were saying some things that I've never heard said, Trevor. Before you were saying they were going to lose.
You know why? It's because I'm mentally ill.
It's probably so. Me as well.
Billy. I'm sick in the head, dude. I need to be institutionalized. Unfortunately for Von Tech fans, I'm not.
Well, Billy, thank you for taking the time to join us here on episode 279. We will be out in Lot 2 starting very early on Saturday, August 31st. So join us in Lot 2 for some delicious food whipped up by Miller McKee. on the Blackstone Grill.
The
We'll
lot
have
lizard.
Cracker Barrel biscuits, some bacon, some eggs, some beer. So everybody come out to Lot 2 and let's celebrate the kickoff to college football season. For myself, Will Byrum, my co-host Trevor Hulan, and our very special guest, Billy Derrick of VandySports.com. Thank you for joining the Door Report, and we'll see you Saturday.